We'll move to questions. Are there any questions? And I'll give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Before becoming Prime Minister, you repeated your promise to cut electricity bills by $275 on no less than 15 occasions. After becoming Prime Minister, you haven't mentioned it once. Prime Minister, you said, and I quote, "It's the job of the Prime Minister to deal with the challenges that Australia faces and not to constantly just blame someone else." So will you be honest with the Australian people and tell them whether they will be getting the $275 cut that you promised them?
And I give the call to the Prime Minister. Order. Order.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, today we have come another step closer to delivering our mandate. Our mandate that we received at the election. Our mandate that was fully modelled by Reputex and that we stand by. Our mandate that will see a 43% reduction in emissions by 2030. While we're doing it, we'll create 604,000 new jobs, 5 out of every 6 of them in regional Australia. Our mandate that will see the renewable sector as part of the national energy market grow to 82% by 2030, all part of our plan to go to net zero by 2050. And I'm pleased that we have made statements today across this parliament of people who are prepared to not get everything that they want, but are prepared to acknowledge the fact that we need to end the climate wars. Those opposite was very different, very different.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Prior to the 2019 election, the then Shadow Minister said that there would be a 25% reduction in the average NEM wholesale spot price to less than $70 per megawatt hour by the end of 2021. That was what was said at that time by the Minister, now the Shadow Treasurer. Now, in May 2019, average wholesale price was $93.
The Prime Minister
2019.
will just take a break for a moment. Give the call to the Manager of. Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I take a point of order on relevance. The question is very specific. Will the Australian people be getting the $275 cut you promised them?
Yes, thank you. On the point of order, the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, we keep being told the question is very specific and then a corner of the question is all that is read out. When, under previous speakers, there's consistently been a principle that where a question has various rhetorical comments in it, it widens the ambit of the answer.
You bet it does.
The question was very broad and the Prime Minister is in order.
Thank you very much. I can see why they don't want to hear this, because they promised it to be $70. It was $93. And guess what it was? $341. Missed by this much. Missed by just $271.25. Promised $70, delivered $341. And now they've come up with, in their opposition to the cheapest form of energy, renewables, they've come up with the most expensive of the solutions. Nuclear power. I mean, putting the member for Fairfax in charge of a review on nuclear power bears an uncanny resemblance to Mr Burns putting Homer Simpson in charge of nuclear power safety there in Springfield. It brings that. No one loves a reactor like a reactionary, which is no wonder they're so obsessed by nukes over there. The truth is, renewables are the cheapest. We will deliver increased renewables into the system.
Order. The member for Barker will cease interjecting. I give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, how will the newly announced Defence Strategic Review ensure Australia is best prepared for the defence and security challenges we face?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lingiari for her question. Australians know that we're facing the most complex strategic environment that we've encountered as a nation in over 70 years. We live in an era of strategic competition and increased tension. We will work with partners to promote peace and stability in our region, and we've already begun repairing some of the relations in the region. But we do have a capability gap in so many areas. It demands a very frank assessment of our defence capabilities and our pipeline, making sure that we can be absolutely confident that we're getting it right, that every dollar is going into the right area, that it's money that is well spent. We want to make sure that we ensure the ADF is well positioned to meet the nation's security challenges over the decade and beyond, which is why today we've announced, once again consistent with the announcement that I made in my speech on the 70th anniversary of ANZUS, and consistent with my speech to the Lowy Institute prior to the election, we've announced a holistic consideration of force structure and posture, of force disposition, of preparedness, of strategy and associated investments. We've appointed the former Minister for Defence and former Minister for Foreign Affairs, Professor Stephen Smith, and the former Chief of the Defence Force, Sir Angus Houston, to be the independent leads of this, a unique blend of knowledge and experience. We want to take stock of the billions of dollars in defence programs, many of which are over budget and are delayed. There are currently 30 major defence projects running a total of 79 years late. 79 years late. We want to make sure that defence has the capability and force structure that's fit for purpose, that's affordable and delivers the greatest return on investment. The reviewers will, of course, work with the Chief of the Defence Force, Angus Campbell, and the Secretary of the Department, Greg Moriarty, and others in the Defence Force area. And we want to make sure that people get this analysis at the same time as the review is taking place into a way forward in terms of the Future Submarines program. It is important, given the relationship with AUKUS as well, that we have this solid, comprehensive review because it is in our national interest to do so, and that is why the government has made this position.
Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, in the last 4 months alone, you were caught not knowing the cash rate, not knowing the unemployment rate, not knowing that Australia's borders were open, not knowing your own NDIS policy, and not knowing how to keep women safe on work sites. On my right. Prime Minister, now that you have been caught giving families—
The Deputy Leader will resume her seat. I think I know where the Leader of the House is going. To assist the House and to assist the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I'd ask her to rephrase the end part of the question to make sure it's not reflecting on— you can repeat the question as long as it does not reflect upon the Prime Minister. I call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to rephrase the question.
My question is to the Prime Minister. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, in the last 4 months alone, you were caught not knowing the cash rate, not knowing the unemployment rate, not knowing that Australia's borders were open, not knowing your own NDIS policy, and prioritising the CFMEU over women's safety on work sites. Prime Minister, now that you have been caught giving families false hope about a $275 cut to their power bill, why won't you fess up and apologise to struggling Australians?
Order. Order. Members on my left, and I'll call the Prime Minister. Order.
I thank the Deputy Leader for her question, which goes to what's occurred over the last 4 months. Goes to what's occurred over the last 4 months, and there's one date in particular sticks in my mind over the last 4 months, and it's the 21st of May 2022. On the 21st of May 2022, 77 members of the Australian Labor Party were elected to the House of Representatives. And those 77 people were elected with a very clear mandate to end the waste and the rorts that dominated those opposite. To end the corruption that occurred by having a national anti-corruption commission, to make sure that we had fairness in the workplace by reforming industrial relations, to give the lowest paid workers on $20.33 an hour $1 a week, $1 an hour increase. Something that they said would ruin the economy.
On my left.
We were elected with a mandate for increased investment in public housing through our Housing Australia Future Fund.
The Prime Minister will just take a break. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. Why is there all this shouting
in
a family-friendly parliament?
Order. The member will resume her seat. The member will resume her seat. That is the second time in a row that she has done that. I warned her specifically yesterday about taking points of order during question time to disrupt question. I want to be very clear on this. She is right down to the wire in terms of pushing me at the moment to ensure that we keep question time flowing. I can't be clearer than that. I call the Prime Minister.
I was asked, Mr Speaker, about the last 4 months, and I'm going through the last 4 months, which I must say I've had worse 4 months. I've got to say that, Mr Speaker, because in the last 4 months, what we've also done, isn't it, is advance the interests of the Australian people who have wanted action on climate change. Who have wanted action on climate change, with a 43% reduction by 2030, where the legislation will be carried. Moving forward the debate about climate change, working with business, working with unions, working with civil society. And that's why, as well, we've convened the Jobs and Skills Summit that will occur, as well, within 4 months of that election on May 21st. That's why we also introduced into this parliament and will carry through both houses 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave. That's why already we are taking action to implement the recommendations of the Aged Care Royal Commission. That's why we've already made moves on the Robodebt Royal Commission. This is a government that has taken up the mantle both before in preparing a solid agenda for a government that's forward-looking, for a government that actually governs as opposed to just engages in cheap, tawdry politics every day.
The Prime Minister's time has expired. Order. I give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What is the importance of the Defence Strategic Review, and how will the review influence Australia's future military capability?
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Pearce for her question, congratulate her on her election to this place and the wonderful first speech that she gave last week. In 1985, the Hawke government, Defence Minister Kim Beazley, commissioned the head of Joint Intelligence at the time, Paul Dibb, to undertake a defence strategic review, which he handed down in March of 1986. It was the underpinning of the strategic settings for the 1987 Defence White Paper and every White Paper since, including the most recent in 2016. It was a seminal piece of work which has given us strategic thought around defence for the last 35 years. Central to it is an idea that if anyone means to do Australia harm, we will be given a 10-year warning. In 2020, the Defence Strategic Update observed for the first time that we are within that 10-year window. It was a profound observation, one with which this government agrees, and it has left a very big question hanging. Given that, what are we going to do about it? And that is the question the job of answering, which has been given to the Defence Strategic Review that the Prime Minister and I announced this morning. You could not want for two more eminent and qualified Australians to undertake that review. Professor Stephen Smith, former Defence Minister, former Foreign Affairs Minister, and Sir Angus Houston, former Chief of the Defence Force. This review will look at questions of force posture. This is the force posture review that we committed to during the election, but it will do much more. It will look at questions of structure, of capability. It will ask and answer foundational questions. Given the complexity of the strategic circumstances that we face, given the difficulty of those circumstances, what is the job that we want our Defence Force to do? And in that sense, this review really will be much more significant even than the DIB review of 1986. We've asked Sir Angus and Professor Smith to report in the first part of next year. In that sense, this will happen concurrently with the body of work which is being undertaken with the United States and the United Kingdom under the banner of AUKUS to provide Australia with a nuclear-powered submarine capability. That's important because it will allow both bodies of work to apprehend each other. It will allow them to cross-pollinate. Together, though, these bodies of work will provide the strategic foundation for defence thinking for decades to come. And underpinning both will be a core mission. How do we keep Australians safe? And that will always be the first priority of the Albanese government.
Make the call to the member for Griffith.
The Prime Minister. Prime Minister, you often speak about the role of public housing in your life.
Order. The member for Griffith will resume his seat. The member for Cowper.
Mr Speaker, I draw your attention to the state of undress of the member.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. There's not a point of order. Resume your seat. Order. Order. I'll give the call to the member for Griffith. The member for Latrobe. Order. The member for Griffith will be heard in silence.
Prime Minister, you often speak about the role of public housing in your life. Currently, there are 162,500 households on the social housing waiting lists around the country. Since 2018, that number has increased by 7,662 homes a year on average. Your Housing Australia Future Fund promises to build just 4,000 social homes a year for 5 years. Prime Minister, won't your policy see the wait list grow, denying hundreds of thousands of people the same chance you had in your life?
Order. The member for McEwen. I give the call to the Prime Minister. Order.
I thank
Members on my right.
I thank the member for Griffith for his question, and I congratulate him on his election to this House. I indeed do understand the importance of having a secure roof over your head and what that can do for the opportunity to advance in life. I know it because I have lived it. And that is one of the reasons why we went to the election with a substantial program, our Housing Australia Future Fund, a $10 billion fund, the returns of which will be used to build around 30,000 social and affordable houses over the next 5 years. But we won't just do that. We'll also establish a National Housing Supply and Affordability Council that will work with state and local government, importantly, to deliver increased housing, be it social housing or affordable housing, particularly through community housing organisations. And I know that the member's political party has substantial representation in local government. And what I'd encourage him to do is to actually encourage the Greens political party to back affordable housing rather than just oppose it. Because in my local area, when there have been programs in Marrickville, they've been opposed. The sort of inclusive programs whereby councils can work with developers to get increased numbers of social housing units in return for an increase in size, but one which then delivers that mix that you need as well. Because one of the things that we've learnt as well over the years and various research has shown is that when we look at increases in social housing, we need to make sure that we don't create pockets whereby there are areas where people grow up where people don't know and don't have role models for people who work, where you have a mix of incomes. And part of my vision for the country is one whereby you won't know what income people have by just looking at their postcode. So I'm quite happy to work with the member on this issue and to work across the parliament, because it is very important that we do that. This is an issue that I've raised with state and territory governments. We have the next meeting of the National Cabinet tomorrow morning, and we will continue to work constructively. We know that pressures are on, particularly renters at the moment, and we want to look at ways in which we can improve housing affordability across the board. We have also a Help to Buy scheme, a regional first home buyer support scheme, and other programs as well. And I'd be pleased to work constructively with them.
I give the call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker, and my question is to the Prime Minister. How will the Albanese Labor government's Powering Australia climate and energy plan change government policy from the last decade in order to create jobs, cut emissions and shape our future?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Fremantle for his question, and I thank him for his long-term commitment in advancing action on climate change and the environment. Our Powering Australia plan we released in December last year. It is the most comprehensive plan ever put forward on these issues by an opposition, and indeed was more comprehensive than any plan put forward by the former government over the previous 10 years. And what it did was understand that the cheapest form of new energy is renewable energy, and that we understood as well, working with the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the National Farmers Federation, that what business wanted was that investment certainty going forward, that investment certainty that will encourage them to be able to look beyond just the short-term horizon towards the 5, 10, 20, 30-year cycle that you need when it comes to investment in new clean energy. But we also understood the opportunity that comes with that. This is about using that cheaper, cleaner energy, working with the National Reconstruction Fund to support existing industries to transition, but also supporting new industries to grow. New industries in advanced manufacturing, new industries making more things here, making our country more resilient. We know from the pandemic that Australia is very vulnerable if we're just at the end of supply chains. So we have to come up with plans where we make more things here, and the key to that is cheaper energy. And the key to cheaper energy is cleaner energy. We know that that's the case. And that's why using the safeguard mechanism, using the other parts of the plan which are there, the electric vehicle tax cut that we've already put through the House of Representatives, the plan for community solar batteries, the plan across the board using the safeguard mechanism to work with those businesses which are high emitters to make sure over a period of time they lower their emissions consistent with the objective of net zero. And it's been well received as well. And there's one thing that some of the critics of climate action say that is correct, which is Australia can't just do things by ourselves. And that's why Australia is out of the naughty corner and background negotiating and talking with our friends in the United States, talking with our friends in the region, our friends in Europe and our friends in the Pacific, because we understand that the challenge of climate change is also an extraordinary opportunity to grow the economy and grow jobs, and that's why when this legislation passes both parliaments, it will be a great day for Australia.
Order. We give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I note the Prime Minister's long and close association with the lawless and criminal CFMEU. I also note that the Labor Party has received over $10 million from the CFMEU since the watchdog was last abolished by Labor. Last week, the Federal Circuit Court gave the maximum penalty to a CFMEU official for breaching right of entry and making disgusting homophobic slurs at a safety advisor. Prime Minister, why are you compromising the right of people to feel safe at work at the behest of your union backers?
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about the ABCC and why my government supports abolishing the ABCC.
Leader of the Opposition.
And I'm also asked about donations in the construction sector. Well, let me tell you a little story about donations in the construction sector of Hanson Proprietary Limited, which donated at least $175,000 to the Liberal Party since 2014. In October 2016, Marianka Human, a 27-year-old German backpacker, tragically fell 13 stories to her death on a Hanson worksite. Employees were forced to continue working while Ms Human lay on the ground covered with a sheet. Hanson's company were fined $60,000 for health and safety violations, which Hanson dismissed as a legal technicality. This is what the judge said. Mr Hanson was blinded by his hatred of the applicants in preventing the taking of logical, rational and reasonable steps of entry and inspection that would have protected and assisted his employees. That was not to their benefit. In 2018, the company was taken by the union, not by the ABCC, for being knowingly involved in the underpayment of a backpacker under an alleged sham contracting arrangement. The case went to the High Court and found that the backpacker employed by Labor Hire Company Personnel Contracting was an employee covered by an award, not a self-employed contractor as he had been designated. He'd been earning 25% less than the award. You'd think that the ABCC might have taken action on that.
Order. The Manager of Opposition Business. Order.
Well, Mr Speaker, after 2 minutes we've heard no reference to the $10 million of donations that the CFMEU has
Resume your seat. The Prime Minister is talking about exactly the issue of donations. I give him the call.
Thank you. Well, in fact, that wasn't just one element of wage theft. PwC have estimated around $320 million of wage theft in the construction sector every year. Every year. They just expose their ideology day after day.
Order. Member for Petrie.
Since it was established, the ABCC have recovered $5 million, representing just $1 million for every year. So $320 million of wage theft, $1 million recovered. But we don't hear anything about that from those opposite, like we don't hear anything about the 116 deaths in the construction industry since the reintroduction of the ABCC in 2016.
And I give the call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How will the Albanese Labor government's climate legislation benefit everyday Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for Corangamite for her question and thank her for advocacy of climate action both direct to me and more broadly over a long period of time. And, Mr Speaker, today is a good day for our country. It's a good day for our parliament, it's a good day for our economy and it's a good day for our future, because today it's become clear that the Albanese government's climate bill will pass both houses of parliament. For a decade, Mr Speaker, the Australian people have watched this parliament and shaken their head in frustration at the lack of action on climate change, and today we say no more. Today the Australian parliament says we have a government that gets it and a parliament that gets it. And today parliamentarians of goodwill and good faith have come together to do something good for our country. And the member for Corangamite might ask what this means for everyday Australians. And what it means is investment. It means investment in the cheapest form of energy, in job-creating energy. And I recognise that not everybody gets it, but enough people in this parliament get it to make this a reality, Mr. Speaker. And my message, I have a particular message, Mr. Speaker, for the people of regional Australia who powered Australia for so long. The people of the Hunter Valley, the people of the Illawarra, the people of the Pilbara, the people of Collibundry, the people of Portland and the Latrobe Valley. Workers there have powered Australia for so long, giving us the energy we need for our economy, and they will continue to do so as we turn Australia into a renewable energy powerhouse, as we turn Australia into a renewable export economy, creating good jobs for the future. That's what the Albanese government will do. We've said consistently, sure, this legislation is not essential for our agenda. Sure, we can get on with the things that we want to do, but this legislation is vital for investment. You would have thought the so-called Party of Free Enterprise would like investment in energy generation, Mr. Speaker. You would have thought the so-called Party of Certainty for Business would like a certain investment framework. But this party, which gave Australia 22 energy policies over a decade and couldn't land one, doesn't want to land another one now, even from opposition.
Order.
Mr. Speaker,
Minister will just order. Take a break, and I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you've been very clear in your rulings. The question does not contain any reference to past policies.
Resume your seat. You need to stand and say what you're raising the point of order on. So resume your seat, and I give the call to the Minister for Climate Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This government will get on with the job we were elected to do. We will work with this parliament to create the certainty and the framework so that we can invest in renewable energy, so that jobs can be created right across our country, and we can be the renewable energy powerhouse this nation has the potential to be, has been trying to be for a decade and has been held back, and will be held back no more after today.
Order. I take the Leader of the House.
Just so that I don't interrupt the flow of questions, I thought I'd do it before the question was asked. I refer to page 514 of practice, where there's an expectation in the parliament that if we use the term you, we're actually referring to the Speaker, and I've noticed, particularly today, it's constantly in questions instead of members being referred to by their title, and I'd simply ask that we continue to enforce the rule the way we previously had.
I thank the Leader. I remind all members, particularly new members and some existing members, that it is not acceptable to say you when speaking. All remarks must be directed through myself as the Chair. And I give the call to the member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the day the construction watchdog was giving evidence against the CFMEU officials accused of sexualising, demeaning and humiliating a female labourer and abusing, threatening and elbowing a female health and safety inspector, the CFMEU donated $65,000 to Labor's federal campaign. Prime Minister, you said it's time to change the culture. That means too many women aren't safe at work. Why are you, Prime Minister, compromising this principle to protect the CFMEU thugs?
Order. I ask the member to resume her seat. About 40 seconds ago, I said not to do exactly what you said, so I will be— the first time I've had the member for Forrest as a question, I'll ask her to rephrase the question and not use that terminology. I call the member for Forrest. Start the clock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the day the construction watchdog was giving evidence against CFMEU officials accused of sexualising, demeaning and humiliating a female labourer and abusing, threatening and elbowing a female health and safety inspector, the CFMEU donated $65,000 to Labor's federal campaign. Prime Minister, it's time to change the culture that means too many women aren't safe at work. Why are you compromising this principle to protect the CFMEU thugs?
Order. Unfortunately, there was no question in there. It's a wise lesson for everyone when you're drafting questions to make sure that principle is adhered to. I give the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What were the findings of the Productivity Commission's interim report released today, and why is meaningful action on climate change such an important economic reform?
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Spence for his important question. Today, the Australian Parliament reflects the will of an Australian people who want to see meaningful action on climate change, who want to move beyond that toxic combination of ideology and idiocy which has characterised the last decade of climate policy from those opposite. They want to move beyond that and to embrace the economic and the environmental opportunities presented by meaningful action on climate change. And I pay tribute to the Prime Minister and the Minister and to every member of this parliament who wants to see that meaningful action on climate change so that we can embrace properly, after a decade of inaction, the opportunities that are presented to us. A better future relies on a more productive economy powered by cleaner and cheaper and more reliable energy. And a wasted decade on energy policy and a wasted decade of flatlining productivity has come with serious costs and consequences for the Australian people. The Productivity Commission report out today shows that the last decade's productivity growth has been the slowest in more than half a century. That's meant that gross national income is $4,600 lower per Australian than it would have been if productivity growth had kept pace with the long-term average. And so those opposite pretended for all of those years that productivity would be up near 1.5%, growing at 1.5%, despite the 20-year average being 1.2%. And we've had to clean that up in the budget assumptions that I released to the parliament last week. Now, we understand, Mr Speaker, that we will only get the growth we need in our economy and the wages growth that's been missing for a decade of wage stagnation and deliberate wage suppression if we make our economy more productive. That's the focus of the Jobs Summit and that's the focus of our economic plan. Skills, childcare reform, investing in key industries and supply chains, and doing something meaningful and ambitious about cleaner and cheaper and reliable energy. This is a crucial economic reform. It's why today is so important to the future of our economy, because cleaner and cheaper energy is about jobs, it's about investment certainty, it's about creating new industries and leveraging our traditional economic strengths. And for too long, as the climate wars raged in this country, these opportunities have gone begging, and it's made our economy weaker and it's made Australians poorer at the same time. For too long, investors and employers and businesses have been denied the policy certainty and vision that they've needed to make their investments in the future. That's why the business community is lining up to support our government's Powering Australia plan. It's why Australians lined up on election day to make their views known as well. And it's why, after a decade of dithering and delay and denial, we will move beyond the ideology and idiocy of those opposite, and we will get this done.
Has expired. I give the call to the Shadow Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer name a single new initiative announced since coming to government that will address the rising cost of living pressures facing Australian households and businesses?
And I give the call to the Treasurer.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, for the call. Thank you to the member for Hume for the question. But most of all, Mr Speaker, from the very bottom of my heart, can I thank whoever thought it was a good idea to get Angus to ask a question about the cost of living. Now, the member for Hume is very chirpy now, Mr Speaker, about the cost of living, but when the Australian people really needed him to speak up about that 20% increase in electricity prices that he intervened to keep quiet about during the election, he was absolutely nowhere to be found. And the same as with the captain's call made by the Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition said that they should extend the petrol excise relief. The member for Hume was asked 8 times in a press conference yesterday afternoon, does he agree with the Leader of the Opposition? And he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it, Mr Speaker. Now, we have been consistent right throughout this conversation. We have said that our priority on the cost of living is to implement the commitments that we took to the election, that the Prime Minister and everyone on this side of the House took to the election. And those commitments are around making childcare cheaper and more affordable for more people. Our commitments
Just allow the Treasurer to resume his seat for a moment. Order. Order. The question. Order. The question was about initiatives. The Treasurer was talking about initiatives. I'll call the member for Hume.
The point of order is relevant, Mr Speaker.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. I'll call the Treasurer. I'll call the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The budget in October will contain a range of new initiatives which we took to the election and won the support of the Australian people for. Cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, a wages policy to get wages growing again in this country after a decade of deliberate wage suppression and deliberate wage stagnation that those opposite chased when it came to their economic policies. And so what we've said all along is when you inherit a budget which is absolutely heaving with $1 trillion in Liberal Party debt, you've got to work out what your priorities are. And our priorities are childcare and skills and the cost of medicine and getting wages growing again, investing in the energies of the future, cleaner and cheaper, more reliable energy, all of the issues that we took to the election and won a mandate for. In many ways, the reason why we're on this side of the House and you, thankfully, are on that side of the House. So we've been consistent all along. Now, when it comes to the cost of living, Mr Speaker, you cannot take those opposite seriously. This is the party that called for fiscal responsibility at the same time as they said we should shovel billions more out the door. This is the party that demands an invite to a job summit they want cancelled. This is the party, if you're to believe the wise words of the Financial Review, this is the party that got John Howard in to teach them about the future. You cannot believe a word that those opposites say about the cost of living. When it comes to the member for Hume in particular, when it comes to the cost of living, he should be ashamed of himself.
Order. Order. The member for Hume will cease interjecting. We'll have silence before we hear the next question. The Minister for Industry is not helping. I give the call to the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. What actions are the Albanese Labor government taking to set Australia's energy network up for the future? What options has the government rejected?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate and Energy.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question, and we are taking action. For example, the climate bill, which will pass both houses of parliament, has been estimated by the Investor Group on Climate Change to unleash up to $131 billion of investment in our energy system, Mr Speaker. We're getting on with the job of modernising our energy grid and rewiring the nation to get the electricity, the renewable energy, from where it's produced to where it's consumed, creating thousands of jobs as we do so. We're getting on with the job of 400 community batteries across our country, of solar banks across our country, and creating 10,000 new energy apprentices, which we'll be saying more about in coming months, to give Australians, young Australians in particular, the skills to take advantage of the renewable energy revolution. Because we believe on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, in some fundamental premises, mainly that the best form of new energy is the cleanest and cheapest. It happens to be the case that the best form of energy is clean energy, and that's cheap energy. And that means making some tough decisions, I have to say. We have to make some difficult choices, like rejecting the most expensive form of energy and the slowest to deploy. That's a tough decision that the government's had to take after much deliberation, to reject the slowest, most expensive form of energy available. We've got some expert advice from an organisation I know those opposite don't like, called the CSIRO, Mr Speaker. It's a scientific organisation. I recommend it to those opposite. It recently examined the cost of energy and found the cheapest form of energy was renewables. It said, the CSIRO GenCost report, renewables remain the cheapest new build electricity generation option in Australia.
Interjecting.
They found the most expensive form of energy is nuclear, Mr Speaker, and also that it could not be deployed until 2030. I'm not sure how you reduce emissions between now and 2030 with a form of energy that can't be deployed until 2030. That is expensive. Firm renewables are $46 a megawatt hour. Nuclear small modular reactor that the opposition seems to like is up to $326 a megawatt hour, Mr Speaker. The most expensive and slowest form of energy. It's like the leader of the opposition walks into a restaurant and they say, well, you can have a meal really quickly that's really tasty and you can be delivered at once, or you can have a meal in weeks' time. That is more expensive. You ask for a nice Wagyu beef and you get a well-done Angus instead.
Order. Order. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy may like his steak, but he'll also refer to members by their correct titles if he chooses to do that. I give the call to the member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Health and Aged Care. The Australian Medical Association and the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners and others have declared that climate change is a health emergency. I commend the government's commitment to developing a national strategy on climate change, health and well-being, as this will begin to address this emergency. Would the Minister please outline to the House the contents of the strategy and the timeline for delivery?
Give the call to the Minister for Health.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Mackellar for this really important question, because the World Health Organization has described climate change as the greatest threat to public health in the 21st century. They estimate that between 2030 and 2050, 250,000 people every year will lose their lives as a direct result of a warming planet. And the impact, Mr Speaker, in Australia will be profound, in a continent that already pushes us right up against the limits of human tolerance. Heat-related deaths will increase. The health effects of more frequent and intense extreme weather events will grow substantially, and vector-borne disease will start to creep southward. The dengue fever exposure zone, for example, is expected to move as far south as Rockhampton by the middle of the century and as far south as northern New South Wales by the end of the century. Mr Speaker, we're already seeing this. Separate from the tragic fatalities caused by the Black Saturday bushfires more than a decade ago, that heatwave in Victoria caused 374 heat-related deaths, as well as a 700% increase in cardiac call-outs to the Victorian Ambulance Service. And like so much in this policy area, Australia lags the rest of the world in climate and health after 9 long years of denial and inaction. But, Mr Speaker, that will change under this government. The first and the most important step, obviously, is to take real action on climate change. And I congratulate my friend and colleague, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, for the bill that he's brought before this House and for the constructive engagement by the member for Mackellar. On this side, though, we know that good climate policy is good public health policy. Renewable energy is not just good for the climate, it also removes dangerous particulate pollution from the atmosphere and improves public health, as do electric vehicles. I've already commissioned advice from my department about the implementation of the election commitment to which the member for Mackellar refers, and I've already had an early discussion with state and territory health ministers about how we can work together, Labor and Liberal alike, to reduce emissions from the health sector, as well as improving its capability to deal with the risks and the opportunities that come with climate change. Mr Speaker, the legislation before the House today is an important first step in ending 9 long years of denial and inaction. But alongside sectors like manufacturing and transport, energy, agriculture and mining, the health sector also needs a focused plan to deal with climate change, and we are getting on with the job of making that plan.
I give the call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. How is the Albanese Labor government maximising job opportunities in regional Australia through its Powering Australia plan?
Give the call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, and I want to thank the member for Bendigo for her question and congratulate her on her re-election, another amazing region in our nation. Mr Speaker, it's clear that only an Albanese Labor government is committed to taking ambitious action on climate change. Through our Powering Australia plan, we will deliver more jobs to regional Australia, which is close to my heart and should be a passion for everyone across this chamber. 5 out of 6 of every job created through our Powering Australia plan will be in the regions. In my home of Eden Monaro, we see every type of renewable energy you can think of. It does wonderful things for our regions. It creates an economic boost. It brings jobs and technology into our regions. And we know that the benefits are going to be duplicated right across this country. Our plan ensures that there will be a clean energy industry right across this nation, that we will prioritise the decarbonisation of existing industries. Our plan will prioritise investment and growth in the regions, which have long been Australia's energy engine room. We are providing certainty to business and industry, most importantly, certainty that hasn't existed for business and industry under the decade of those opposite when they were in government. We want to harness the partnership with our communities and with local government because we know that there will be growth opportunities that will come from maximising renewable energy in our regions. Regional Australia will continue to power our nation. It will continue to provide a stream of exports into the future because we know here that our climate emergency is regional Australia's jobs opportunity. It's part of our government's pledge to reduce carbon emissions by 43% by 2030 and getting to net zero by 2050. This side of the House takes seriously the need to reduce carbon emissions. This side of the House takes seriously the need to take action on climate change, and this side of the House takes seriously the need to boost and grow jobs in regional Australia.
And I give the call to the member for Fairfax. Members on my right.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, and I refer to the fact that the Leader of the Greens has been successful in changing the government's emissions legislation to stop government agencies investing in gas projects. Given the minister has joined with the Leader of the Greens previously in questioning the importance of gas, can he guarantee his support for the Beetaloo Basin project and other important gas projects? What will be the cost to the economy and jobs of this concession to the Greens?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. If the opposition had wanted to engage in conversation with the government, they could have, instead of just opposing the bill. But what we have done is put the climate targets in as an object and function of a range of government organisations. If you're not in favour of targets, you don't require government organisations to work with them as their objects.
Order. Order. Members on my left will remain silent so I can hear the question. Order. Give the call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support the well-being of defence personnel, veterans and their families?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I congratulate you on your appointment to your esteemed role and its importance to our Australian democracy. And I thank the member for Holt for her question on this very important issue, and I congratulate her on her election to this place. The Albanese Labor government is committed to improving and adapting to the needs of currently serving defence personnel, veterans and their families. The Australian community has a clear expectation that veterans and their families are well looked after, and we are committed to delivering a package of practical supports, measures that will improve the welfare and well-being of veterans and families. And that's why I was so pleased to be able to introduce legislation just today that will achieve that. It will go to supporting families who are bereaved, those who are in crisis, no matter the nature of that crisis. This legislation demonstrates that the new Albanese Labor government is committed to addressing and providing greater support to defence personnel, veterans and their families. On the services front, we will develop 10 new veterans and families hubs that will bring services together in communities where veterans actually live, making them accessible, tailoring them to the needs of the veterans in those communities. And in this week, Homelessness Week, I'm very happy to say that the Albanese Labor government has committed $30 million towards addressing veterans' homelessness, making sure that we're addressing the unique needs for our veterans facing homelessness or at risk of homelessness and providing the services that they need to address that. We have, of course, committed to making sure that veterans can get a job, because we know that is a clear pathway to success back into the civilian life for veterans and their families. And our Veterans Employment Program is not just about connecting veterans to jobs, but making sure that employers know the great benefit that a veteran can provide to them and to their business. And right now, we have the Royal Commission going on into defence and veteran suicide. Defence and veteran suicide is a national tragedy. We listened to the families of veterans and defence personnel who have taken their lives in supporting the call for this Royal Commission to be established. And I look forward to receiving the interim report from that Royal Commission when it is handed down next week. And I also look forward to meeting with my state and territory veteran minister counterparts in the coming weeks so that we can work together with them to make sure that across the country we are delivering a better future for our veterans. Yeah.
And I give the call to the member for Calais.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Why has the government changed the distribution priority area classification for rural doctor shortages to now include outer metropolitan areas in a move that the Rural Doctors Association of Australia warns will wreak havoc in the bush and also that it could cost lives of rural and remote patients? Why is the government putting the lives of rural Australians at risk?
Order. I give the call. Order. I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
More doctors in the regions. Did you really just ask that?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm delighted to take a question on what this government is doing to make it easier to see a doctor. Because I tell you, the position we inherited from those offered, which is that it has never been harder, never more expensive to see a doctor than it became under this government, after 9 long years of cuts and neglect to Medicare. Now, Mr Speaker, let me just run through for context what exactly led to the decisions I've been asked about. Back in 2019, the former government ripped away the ability to recruit overseas-trained doctors from 140 GP regions. 140 GP regions, which for years had depended upon overseas-trained doctors to fill their consulting rooms, had that removed in the stroke of a pen. And I can tell you on this side, a number of MPs organised discussions with patient groups and with doctors to run through what that had meant to those local communities. Members in the Hunter Valley, like the new member for Hunter, the member for Patterson, the member for Shortland, the member for the candidate for Leichhardt and the senator for Far North Queensland, said to me what that meant for the people of Cairns, what it meant for the Hunter Valley to have those consulting rooms hollowed out, utterly hollowed out at the stroke of a pen by the former government. And we took an evidence-based approach, Mr Speaker, to this question. We had a long Senate inquiry that took evidence from patient groups, from doctors' groups, from local communities about what exactly that had meant for people wanting to go in and see a GP. It lifted the lid on the impact of that decision by the Morrison government back in 2019. Now, the former government had pretended that recruiting a doctor in the Hunter Valley was the same as recruiting a doctor in Mossman. They pretended that recruiting a doctor on the Central Coast was the same as recruiting a doctor on the North Shore. But after 3 years of their experiment ripping out from regional Australia the ability to recruit those GPs,
the Minister for Health will take a break, and I call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Point of order is on relevance. The question asked specifically about the Rural Doctors Association of Australia warning that this will wreak havoc in the bush.
The question also asked about the changes to the distribution priority areas and the classification for rural doctors. The Minister is in order, and I give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I tell you, we make no apology for making it easier to see a doctor in this country. We make no apology for strengthening Medicare after 9 long years of cuts and neglect. And as the member and those opposite should know, a range of incentives continue in place. For example, the Workplace Incentive Program that provides up to $60,000 additional incentives for those modified Monash model areas, number 3 to 7, that continue to provide additional incentive to rural health areas. There is still much to do to undo the damage of those opposite, Mr Speaker. Strengthening Medicare cannot happen overnight, but we make no apology for starting to undo the damage inflicted after 9 long years of their cuts and neglect to the Medicare system.
Order. I give the call to the member for Paterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How will Labor's commitment to strong action on climate change drive manufacturing jobs in Australia? And which regions and industries will benefit from Labor's plan to cut emissions and increase jobs?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Speaker, and thank you to the member for Paterson, because she, like many of us, know the transition to cleaner, cheaper energy prices energy provides huge opportunities for Australian manufacturing and jobs, and we know that Australian manufacturers have been under enormous pressure, with energy making up a big part of their production costs. And rising prices, especially gas, has been something of concern to them, so getting access to cleaner, cheaper energy, very important. We've come to government with a big agenda to reinvigorate manufacturing, to rebuild our industrial base, to build regional employment and secure well-paying jobs now and into the future. Mr Speaker, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, reported in June that in 5 of Australia's industrial regions, Pilbara and Kwinana in WA, Gladstone in Queensland, the Hunter and Illawarra in New South Wales, the transition to renewables and cuts to emissions could result in nearly 380,000 jobs. So as part of that process, we've planned to put $100 million to invest in a battery manufacturing precinct in regional Queensland. And our national battery strategy will tap into the interest and enthusiasm across the nation to be involved in onshore battery manufacture. And if we get this right, we're advised we could create 34,000 jobs and generate $7.4 billion a year into the economy by 2030. And that's before we even get to the 10,000 new energy apprenticeships that we want to deliver. We've missed opportunities in clean energy manufacture before, and we determined that that shouldn't be repeated. Labor's got plans to deliver a capacity for renewables manufacturing through our National Reconstruction Fund. We've set aside $1 billion for value-adding in resources that will ensure that we transform the minerals we're extracting into the high-value products that the global economy will need in the future. Frankly, if we mine it here, we should make it here. And we've also earmarked $3 billion for renewable and low-emissions technology in our Powering Australia sub-fund in the NRF, targeting green steel, aluminium, clean energy component manufacturing, and developing a domestic hydrogen industry and much more. Mr Speaker, our Rewiring the Nation plan also been noticed. Acciona, one of Europe's biggest renewable energy companies, last month announced a $26 billion investment in the Australian renewable energy sector. Their CEO, Jose Manuel Encarnaciones, explicitly stating that the election of our government was a reason for this investment, saying the Labor policy to put $20 billion into the electricity transmission grid was essential to their plan. We are determined to produce cheaper, cleaner energy and create the jobs required into the future.
And I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.